don't we all focus on our weaknesses way more than our strengths? Because I think, like, at the end of the day, I could have achieved, 3 things that were really good. But if something bad went wrong, the only thing I'm going to remember is that thing that went wrong. And I'm not going to think about the things that went right. And I'm constantly thinking, okay, well, I can't do that, or I'm not going to be able to achieve that, or how am I going to figure that out? Rather than thinking like, well, actually, these are all of my strengths that I've got. These are all the things that I'm really, really good at. Why don't I drive my energy into this more? And I think, as we grow up, we feel that we only look at our weaknesses and we just kind of bypass our strengths. And so something that's like really helped me with self-growth, self-love, self-care is like actually writing down every day, like, what did I do good at today?
Hi, everyone. We have a new friend for you. Our guest today is Sarah Ann Macklin, and she is an award-winning AFN accredited nutritionist and the host of the Live Well, Be Well podcast. She has spoken at a TEDx conference, a TEDx speaker she's a health journalist. She's an author. She was named Woman of the Year in 2019. She was so wonderful. I'm not going to list her incredible angelic voice and accent in her list of attributes, but you are definitely going to enjoy her. She is a former international model and did a TEDx talk called Our Models, Role Models. And she looks at the demands of the model image, challenging the industry to create healthy balances between mind, body, and food. And she has an organization called the Be Well Collective, helping young and men through workshops and mentoring to really heal their body and their mind. She's an overall wellness expert, and I think you're going to really love her. So enjoy this one.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Kelsey.
Welcome back, guys. I'm Rachael, and our guest today is Sarah Ann Macklin. And you guys are going to absolutely die at how adorable she is. I can't even. She is so amazing. But not only that, is she's so knowledgeable. So, Sarah, you are an award-winning nutritionist and the host of the Live Well, Be Well podcast. And we are so excited to have you today. Welcome.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I can't wait to dive into our conversation.
Yeah, I think our listeners are really going to love to hear from you. So can you start by telling us your career started as a model before you realized the calling to health and nutrition. Can you tell us a little bit how you got started and what led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to try and take all of the audience's mind back to what the wellness or well-being industry was like about 12 years ago, because there basically wasn't one. There was no conversation around mental health. There was a real lack of conversation or knowledge around nutrition. And I'm sure, and I lived in New York for 5 years, and we'll get onto that later, but like even when I lived in America, I felt that they were 5 steps ahead of England. So from me coming from like a small town in the countryside in Hampshire and then moving to London, there just wasn't any conversation around nutrition or mental health or anything like that. And so, as I said, I lived in the countryside. I was scouted when I was 15 to be a model by some big London scouts. And then all of a sudden, my life completely changed. And I was flying to Paris, flying to Milan, flying to New York and shooting, with people like Ralph Lauren and Vogue. And a whole bunch of people that, Bath and Body. I'm trying to think of like some big American brands that I work with, but a whole host of people basically. And, what I looked at success when I was younger was what the Oxford Dictionary defines success as, which is fame, wealth, and social status. And by the age of 20, I basically had them all. But that was not the story. I was desperately unhappy, desperately lonely, hadn't looked after my health, and was basically just striving for this life that on the outside looked very glamorous, but actually on the inside was really, really lonely. I had no health advice on how to look after myself, although my body was basically what was making me money. So you go to all these different extremes to try and stay this kind of like perfect size, perfect being, or actually that's just not a concept. And so my health just completely broke down. I ended up in intensive care. I had septicemia. I was internally bleeding. I had, a failed kidney. I was just over 5 stone, which I'm trying to figure out what that is in pounds, but I'm not sure. But basically, very thin. And I had a moment where I actually realized that my health I hadn't looked after my health at all. I hadn't even acknowledged that as part of my journey. And it made me start thinking about what is my values, what do I really care about? And if you don't have your health, you don't really have anything. And around this time, social media had launched. And if you take back 10 years ago, social media was basically people taking pictures of their food, their breakfast, or giving out, information on what they believe to be correct. And I was very much kind of like taken down this rabbit hole of being sold this dream that actually had no scientific evidence behind it. And I really believe that was like one of the determinants that kind of like took me down this road. So I was already in like an epicenter of like this perfection, and I knew what every angle of my body looked like, which is just, not healthy. And then I also kind of had social media at the launch where it was like telling you a way to live your life, but not rooted by kind of expert advice at all. And those kind of things just caused a huge car crash. So I actually left New York and I thought, I don't want to be here. I'm in a really bad way. I need to build up my health and I need to understand how to do it. So I enrolled, first of all, in a Bachelor of Science for nutrition, for human nutrition. And after 3 to 4 years of studying that, became an accredited nutritionist. And then I looked at the psychology of eating disorders because I thought, well, actually we can tell people what we eat, but actually so much is rooted in our behaviors and our psychology aspect towards, why are we not making these changes? And that is such a fundamental part. So my journey kind of really took me more down that route as well. And then I combined them together where, after about 7 years, I launched a mental health organization called the Be Well Collective, which brings a host of all different experts and conversations around the concept of mental health and nutrition. I also had a clinic on Harley Street, which I did for over 5 years, which is kind of like the hub district of the medical world. And then again, did a lot of my like keynote speaking and kind of talks through Instagram and content as well, to basically get that health information out there that was accredited and right. And I think that's what I was so strong in, like busting myths and giving out like the right medical advice, but really linking this concept of nutrition, mental health. And like in the last 10 years, that has really, really grown, which is amazing because we're starting to have good conversations around this, reduce the stigma. But it's only really since COVID that the mental health side has really started to come more on the periphery. So for me, that's kind of like where I've ended up today. And another kind of angle that I do is the podcast, which is, as you guys know, like so important to have such diverse conversations with such a host of like different incredible people, and I basically try to tie all of that together in the podcast as well. So that's kind of been a bit of my journey, from a fashion model now to the complete opposite side, but it's one that I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't be as passionate, and I wouldn't feel like I had so much purpose if I didn't go through all of that to get me here. So that's why I'm very passionate about sharing the right health accredited advice on my platforms, and hopefully building a trusted audience.
Wow, that's, one of the things that I think struck me most about that whole background is just like how short this has actually been, where like you were in an industry just 10 years ago and you had no access whatsoever to any
Mm-mm.
nutrition, and an industry that is so largely based on your body and with like no guidance whatsoever. And then it was weird
Mm-hmm.
because when, the availability of social media and stuff came along, then it started to be, okay, now there's availability, but it's all like myths. And now it's all like, we're not sure what's true, what's not true. And everything's for likes. And it's
So true.
so new, and I've never really thought of it as really as new as it is. And I think you just pointed that out so eloquently, that we're very short into this journey.
Yeah.
And just now are we starting to really hit a stride with being able to access good information.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's just really important for people to be aware of, like, what does that information look like? Because again, like, the one thing that social media has done so like brilliantly is like open the doors to access, okay, to like a host of information, to people who are experts actually being able to have a platform and like share that information. And that is amazing. And honestly, the fact that mental health stigma seems to be reducing and people are talking about this more and sharing, you know, new research papers that are coming out all over the internet, is amazing. But there is also like the whole flip side, where there is still so much kind of uncredited advice out there. You know, in England last week, I think she was English, she might be English or Australian, but it was in the English newspapers. You know, a vegan influencer, a vegan raw diet, I want to say raw diet, yeah, that was right, influencer died last week.
I saw
um
this.
and that was like terrifying. And, you know, and I think I retweeted that and rethreaded it and whatever it is, reposted it on my Instagram stories, all of these different platforms. But basically kind of said, you know, this is why it's still so nuanced. We still have so many people speaking who aren't expertly driven in their advice. And I think that's just something to be really, really careful. And I think it might be different in the States, but in England, you know, if you're a part of the AFM, which is the Association of Nutrition, it means that you've done that kind of 3 to 4 year Bachelor of Science from an accredited university that has done a specifically graded course. Again, if you're a dietitian, you're with the British Dietetic Association. And I'm sure, you know, within America, you've got these same ethical bodies that, you know, that if you go to these people, that they actually have to stand by the code of conduct. And that's really important. Whereas sadly, still, there is still so much unsolicited advice out there. So I just say, you know, if anyone sells you a magic pill, takes you on a trend, anything that's kind of losing weight within like 4 weeks, that's this like magic pill, or a load of supplements that people get given, like all of these things are like very short fixes, but they can have a huge detriment on our health. And I think that's what's really important. You know, I was seeing people come into clinic, and this is could end up being quite severe, but people that were taking high blood pressure tablets, for example, were like coming in and they were like, Sarah, you know, my blood pressure's rising again and I feel like I'm eating well and all of these things. And they were taking supplements that were like counteracting the blood pressure tablets working. And again, people were coming in saying, oh, I feel really ill, you know, I feel like I'm really faint, and they had really low blood pressure, and it's because they were having too much turmeric, and that can lower people's blood pressure. So there's all of these things where there's so much nuance in the conversation around health and food. And I think when we start kind of really zoning in on it, we've got to be really careful on the advice that we give out online. So anyone that's saying like what they eat in a day, I find quite detrimental, because we're so individual and unique. So if I say, well, I have this for breakfast, this for lunch, this for dinner, you know, either of you, that might not suit your bodies and what your exercise regime is, how you are on any supplementation, if you're on any medication. So all of those things, I think it's really important just to kind of, yeah, talk about that and actually say, you know, don't take anything step by step online. Make sure you go and see somebody who is actually consults in this and is a practitioner, because that's just fundamentally important. So yeah, I went off on a bit of a rant there, sorry. But
No,
I do find it really
perfect.
important.
No, I think that's a really important point too, because you know, there's a lot of outside influences where people just say like, well, just tell me what you eat in a day. And I continuously say like, that's irrelevant to what you should eat in a day. Like
Totally.
what I'm consuming is completely irrelevant to your body. We have different bodies. We could eat the exact same thing every day. We could even do the same workout routines, which you know we're not going to do, but we could, and we still shouldn't be consuming the same things, because my body is different than yours. My metabolism is working different. My lifestyle is different. I live a different life, and in general, my body is different. So like sometimes, you know, access to all this information is very important, and there's a lot of upsides to it. But like you said, there is so much that's being pumped out there that we just want to consume in bite-sized portions and not really with a full understanding of what, you know, what that looks like and how to translate that into our own personal lives. And the last thing I wanted to, just for my American ladies out there, just understanding what she was meaning in pounds. It's about 70 pounds.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. I was like, I can't work that out really quickly in my head, so I'm really glad that you did that.
I was like, I got you on that just to give a, you know, a general gauge to, you know, how sick you were. And I think it's really important to get a visual of when someone is really sick and they are struggling mentally, physically. And during those times, you're kind of being pictured as a model, and that is being shown when someone is really ill. And I think sometimes like we don't conceptualize that, because a lot of women especially have this idea that, you know, they have these dream bodies, they have these, you know, ideals that they put up and say like, well, I'm going to be that, when you have no idea what's going on with
Oh
someone's
God,
body,
it's
with someone's
so
health.
important. Honestly, like I had loads of autoimmune conditions that I didn't realize of why my body weight was so low. So this was the problem. I actually didn't have an eating disorder. I had IBD, which is bowel disease, and I couldn't figure out like what foods were making me sick. Well, I just had like no information. I didn't even know like the foods were making me sick. I mean, that's kind of how naive I was to this conversation. But stupidly, you know, my career was going great. The thinner I was getting, you know, the bigger I was getting. And that's such kind of it's like a bad reinforcement of like, you know, you're doing really well because you're getting really thin. Um, and it's one of those things that actually that's one of my unhappiest periods of my life, like mentally, physically, emotionally, everything, you know. And now, you know, many years later, obviously I feel like I'm much wiser because I've grown up. But, you know, through all that time, there's been so many times where it's been incredibly hard and I've just wanted to give up. Even kind of changing career is terrifying because through all of this, I figured out I was dyslexic. So I didn't really want to go back to school because I was like, I'm not good at science, you know. But actually, I realized that I was, and I realized that what my gifts could be from understanding this and how I learn differently. But all of these moments through the change of my career and going into becoming an expert, I had to fight so many battles as well for people to not see me as that fashion model, then really secure my status in this. And I think, you know, that kind of perfectionist body that we have, I find that so it's very media driven, but it's also very social driven. You know, if somebody does lose weight, the first thing people go is, oh my God, you look amazing. And it's all of these like poor reinforcements that we constantly hear, you know, as opposed to saying like, oh, actually you're feeling great mentally. That's amazing. I'm really pleased that you're doing well and you're feeling good in yourself, as opposed to how you look. And I think, you know, we can blame media as much as we want, but so much, and we do it without kind of thinking it. It's not a conscious thought, but so much of like how we kind of frame things to our friends, our family, our partners, it's a lot about like how people look. And actually, if we take that out, that can be like a huge weight off people's chests. And I think, you know, we do have this kind of idolized image, and I'm very much was in the epicenter of that, being a model. And now I am so aware that everyone I was around was depressed or anxious or had a low self-esteem. And I can say, like, for, you know, 100% truthfully, that every single person I knew in the modeling industry had incredibly poor self-esteem, including my own. Whereas now I've stepped kind of, and I'm still joined to it still. I still work in there with brands and certain things, but I've really taken myself out, and I took myself out for a very long time. And my gosh, did my self-worth grow. And like that social comparison that you have as a model, where literally every time you go in, you are competing with every person, even your roommates that you're living with, you're competing against them. It's so unhealthy. But then you take that into society, and we're still comparing ourselves, like every time we open Instagram, every time we look at a newspaper, every time we open a magazine, we have this like social comparison, constantly judgment. Even if we're going out with a friend, we're like comparing ourselves. Oh, she might look better in that than I do. And it's so detrimental to one's self-worth. So it's like removing all of that and actually being like, what is it that, how do I want to feel in my body? Do I want to feel like strong? Do I want to feel like proud? Do I want to feel that I've got like energy? Because for me, the biggest thing that I want to get is not feeling like really like brain foggy and sluggish. I want to feel like I'm energized and I can move my body and I wake up with a spring in my step. And that's not necessarily on how thin it is. It's actually like, how am I feeding my body and fueling my body to give me that constant state of energy and fuel? Whereas sadly, like we're just not taught about that when we're young. You know, it's all about aesthetics. And so I think, like, just for anyone listening, for people just to kind of reflect themselves and thinking, how do they compare themselves day in, day out? Like, and I think if you write it down, you'll be surprised on how many times a day you're doing it. Like, literally, I've done it before, and you write it down, you're like, wow, I compared myself to that person on a meeting. I compared myself to that person walking down the street. I compared myself to that person in the grocery market. And you actually go, I've just compared myself without consciously realizing continuously throughout the day. And so you have to then start catching yourself and giving yourself more self-love in that area, because it's so much sadly about our own work to kind of banish that perfectionist image of that we have of oneself and our body. So yeah, I think that's something that's really important for especially women to acknowledge.
That's such a great segue into my next question because, I watched your TEDx talk and it was on the importance of role models. And
Mm.
it was specifically talking about, our models, role models,
Mm-hmm.
because these are, people in the media and images that we're seeing as ideal. And you talked a lot about the messages that we're receiving every day and how we're translating those into our thoughts. And I just wanted to ask you, we know the messages that we received. And I just wanted to ask you, ideally, what kind of messages would you like to create for a next generation of girls who are not, growing up in the same environment we are, but with very, very similar social pressures and role models?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question, because I ended that TED talk by saying every single one of us are role models. Like, we look to the media as them being the role models. And yes, they are. And there's this kind of like, social hierarchy where we look up to these people and it filters down and we try to reenact that behavior. But actually, like, every single one of us is a role model, especially the people that we're growing up with. They are our role models, without knowing it. So the people that you work with, they're your role models. Like, you're role models to one another, because you watch each other every day. You're creating a podcast, you've got your strengths and weaknesses, and you're role modeling that off one another. um but I kind of think, like, going forward, and it's a question I think about a lot, because I have an 11-year-old niece, and I'm really aware of how she's growing up differently to how I was growing up. She really wants to go onto TikTok. She's super aware. If I don't eat meat, for example, and I made that decision over 12 years ago, I'm very conscious of the fact that I don't eat meat in front of her, and I don't want her to think that that's an unhealthy behavior. That's just my personal choice. And so I'm really aware of, like, how this is being driven to her. Um, and the music she's listening to and the things that she's reading, and actually how her brain is so much more formulated than mine was at 11-year-old. And so I think, for the younger generation growing up, I think something that's going to be really, really important to drive home to them is, because they've got Instagram that we didn't have, and they've got TikTok. So I think that one of the biggest things is going to be around social comparison. It's about kind of like actually getting people to understand more about themselves and their bodies, and giving themselves practices every day. And I think if there's role models that can do that, to kind of show different things that they can do to help regulate their emotions, to understand their emotions, is a big thing, because so many people get to their 30s and end up having burnout or a breakdown because they don't understand their emotions. They've never understood the concept of that. But now in youth, they've got so much more pressure, I think, and I believe, than we did, because they're bombarded 24/7. They don't leave school and go home and actually then just have their friends and family that are at home. They are constantly online. Their attention is always drawn to something else. And so I think actually getting them to understand their emotions and understand these behaviors are really, really important. And I think that's something that role models can do a lot more of. Something else that, and I just mentioned there about attention. So I think one is about, like, kind of emotional regulation, role models that can do that. Number two, I think, is showing that life's not linear. Because I think I grew up very much understanding that, okay, I leave school, I go to college, I go to university, I get a job, these are the things that I do. And I was dyslexic, and I think there's loads now coming out around ADHD, dyslexia, autism, and we seem to all be very much boxed when we're younger. And I think this is where a lot of disruption can come up when we're older, because we actually feel like, well, we're not good enough, or we don't fit into the system, and this isn't linear. And now, the opportunities for work are so much more vast than what it was when I was growing up. Like, who would have thought we would be doing a podcast? Like, that didn't even exist when we were young. Like, now, like, oh my God, you can go and own your own brand, you can be an entrepreneur, you can have a podcast, you can do all these things. And so it's like actually showing the kids, like, through role models like you guys, or people like that talking about this, that you can go on and achieve these things and actually you don't need to be stuck into this linear system. And I think that is like so inspiring for a young kid to hear, that actually, do you know what, if you're not great at this, it doesn't matter, because you can do all of these things and there's a host of opportunities out there for you. I would have never thought I had done a science degree, being incredibly dyslexic, but like somehow carved my way through that. And it was only from hearing people like Richard Branson or Steve Jobs, all speaking about their neurodiversity. I was like, screw it, I can do it. I'm just not going to be your normal nutritionist. I'm going to be someone who's going to look at things differently and open a different lens and, try to inspire people, as opposed to like sit behind a desk and just kind of see one-to-one clients. I kind of want to be a storyteller and a communicator. And I think role models that can show that as well is really inspiring for the younger generation, to try and like carve their attention into something where they can drive that, as opposed to feeling that their attention is just constantly sparred through so many different outlets. So I think they're two like really big things of role models, like emotional regulation and inspiration through like storytelling and showing that life's not linear.
I just love the idea of translating that life isn't linear to the next generation, because I think that was never presented.
Right?
That was never presented. It was like, either you are good, and I just like wholeheartedly like am invested in everything you just said with that, because like your life either went in this direction, and if you weren't good at those things, like somehow you were an outsider, you were a weirdo, and you weren't going to be successful. And I have felt the weight of that my entire life, is that like I'm not fitting into being a good student or learning in the same way that everyone else is learning, and that means I'm not going to be successful, and I have to like hide those qualities, because in order to be successful, you have to meet these standards. And just presenting the idea that we all have some different strengths, we learn differently. There are so many different ways that we can carve out our space in this life to be successful in our own way, that you don't have to be good at some of these other things, because you can be good at different things, and there is a space for you there. Like the
you can
idea
hire
that there's
someone
a space. Yeah.
that's good at the bad things that you can't do.
Something I learned way too late. I was like, oh my God, I have to be good at these things. And I was like, oh, I could just hire someone to do that.
Exactly. I wish I was told that when I started my business.
How about let everybody do what they're good at? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because that serves the person that also is very attention to detail orientated, and like that helps them. And they're like, I'm not an extrovert. I don't want to, be out there speaking. That's not where I feel good. That doesn't mean you're not good at things either. Like that's just where your lane, and like this is my lane. And I as a sister of a neurodivergent person, and now as a mother of a neurodivergent child, I could not back this message up more. That like, Sarah, we're going to amplify as much as we can, because you have an amazing message there for the next generation, and like it needs to be just shouted from the rooftops.
Oh, thank you. And like honestly, I think a lot of it comes from like being a kid and just not feeling good enough. Like I was told by my psychology teacher, well, I was basically told through my whole life that I was stupid by my teachers, and then just told that I was going to end up working and not that anyone working in a supermarket is not successful, but it's just basically that was her derogatory comment to me. I was like, you're just not going to like basically finish school, and you're just going to end up behind a till. And I was like, well, no, like, or maybe if that's what I want to do, then that's fine. But actually, like, there's loads of other things I like to do. Like, I love communicating and speaking. And, she was just like, no, you're never going to do that. And I think that's like what really gave me this like power to be like, one, like never, ever, ever tell a child that they can't do something. And two, like get them to figure it out, like find out what their strengths are. Because even people that aren't neurodiverse, and like maybe you guys can back me up on this, but like I felt because I was neurodiverse, I was kind of way more on the back. But actually taking this concept to everyone who is, and I actually truly believe we're all partly neurodiverse. We've all got something within us. But don't we all focus on our weaknesses way more than our strengths? Because I think like, at the end of the day, I could have achieved 3 things that were really good. But if something bad went wrong, the only thing I'm going to remember is that thing that went wrong. And I'm not going to think about the things that went right. And I'm constantly thinking, okay, well, I can't do that, or I'm not going to be able to achieve that, or how am I going to figure that out? Rather than thinking like, well, actually, these are all of my strengths that I've got. These are all the things that I'm really, really good at. Why don't I drive my energy into this more? And I think, as we grow up, we feel that we only look at our weaknesses and we just kind of bypass our strengths. And so something that's like really helped me with self-growth, self-love, self-care is like actually writing down every day, like, what did I do good at today? Like, yes, I can acknowledge the things that went wrong, but what actually did I do? What actually am I good at? And the more that I reframe those things that went right, the more that I actually kind of have my confidence to go on and like push myself more. Because there's been so many risks that I've taken through my career, like so many. But if I never believed in myself, I wouldn't have done it. And I think like you actually have to believe in yourself. And I think the biggest gratitude I have is for that teacher saying like, you can't do it, you won't be anything. Because it genuinely remains like the cornerstone of my mind of being like, I'm going to prove her wrong, even all these years later. And it could have gone the other way. I could have actually just always believed I was a failure. But somehow I managed to like re-acknowledge that and think, no, that's wrong, and I'm going to prove her wrong. And so I think that's something that we all should take, is like, actually, like, remember you all have strengths, and all of those strengths are super unique, and they're unique basically to you and no one else, and just drive and lean into them as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Everyone listening to us, like, write down your strengths right now and acknowledge the fact that you do things well every day, because we just beat ourselves up over the one thing that went wrong. I could have an amazing conversation with someone, and at one point I said something that I was like, was that stupid? And I'm like thinking about it at 3 a.m.
Yeah, right?
I'm like replaying it and being like, did they take that in the way that I didn't mean it, or something along those lines? So it's like, you had an hour-long conversation with them, Kelsea. Like, there were so many positives and great things that came out of that. Like, why are you focusing on this like one thing? But that's just a common thread that continues to that we kind of hyper focus on sometimes, with like,
Totally.
what are we not good at? What am I deficient in? What did I not do right today? Instead of like, I did a lot of things really well. And I think that's a good segue into some of talking about some of nutrition things, health and wellness. What do you think is the biggest misconception people have about health and wellness?
I think, gosh, I think there's just so much. What's the biggest misconception? I feel like I could do a whole podcast on this, a whole series on this, actually. I think like it's two things. I think one of the biggest things that I see is that people think that any change is really easy. And I think so much about anything that we change, whether it's our diet, whether it's going to therapy, whether it's like increasing our exercise, like, nothing comes super easy. But actually, like, anything that goes outside your comfort zone is where you see like real change and growth. But for some reason, people think that if they don't get there, that they're a failure. So one of the things that I see is that people want to change everything in one go. So they'll come to me, they're like, right, I want to take all of these supplements. What do I have to take? How many times a day do I have to take it? What should I be cooking? What should I be eating? And they literally come in with like 10 million requests. And I'm like, guys, like, let's just stop for 1 minute. Let's just see where you are. Okay, we're not even meeting like 5 vegetables a day. So like, forget all of these other things that you're trying to include in your diet. Let's just literally start at the basics. And like, the very sad thing is, I think a lot of people know the basics, right? We know that we've got to be eating more fruit and vegetables. We know we've got to be drinking more water. Kelsea, great time to do that right there. Like, we know we've got to be doing all of these things. We know we've got to be doing like 30 minutes of exercise a day, but like, we don't incorporate it into our lives. And I think so many times people want the next level and the next level and the next level, but we very rarely actually look at like, where is our baseline? Like, where are we? Okay, if we can actually start to incorporate these things just here, and like, how do we do it? Then let's look up. But if we can't keep this baseline for 3 months, you're not going to incorporate all of these new things and keep them long term. And I think the problem with that is then what happens is we go through fluxes, and then we feel as a failure, and then we're like, okay, well, we're going to build ourselves back up again. Oh, but we failed again. And again, it's like that negative loop. And so I think like the biggest misconception around kind of a healthy lifestyle, as I put it, is that like there shouldn't be any restriction. Like the biggest thing is that we need to get enjoyment from what we're doing. We have to live our lives, and I think that is like essential to understanding anything that you start. You know that you got a busy job, you know you want to see your friends, you know you love eating out. Well, then that's really important to like understand where your baseline is, and then what can we add on. And so then I say, like, for anyone, when you figured out where that is, to do one small thing a week. So people go, well, I need to put more fiber in my diet. Okay, I'm going to grab all of this fiber and chuck it in. And then they get GI upsets because they put too much fiber in too quickly, or they're not drinking enough water. It's like all very small things, but it puts them off making a sustainable change. And so what I say is, like, whatever it is that week, just add one thing in. So if it's exercise, add one thing in that you're going to do differently, that you're going to stick to. If it's the next week, when you go to like the grocery store, pick up one vegetable or one fruit that you've never tried or not cooked with before. If you do that every week for 4 weeks, you're going to have 4 new fruits or vegetables in your diet in a month without putting pressure on yourself. Like, it's about how can you maintain a sustainable lifestyle, as opposed to, okay, tomorrow I want to upgrade my gut health, I want to support my mental health, I want to do all of these things. And the stress that you've got to change all of it basically also sets yourself up for failure, but also makes you more stressed. And it's like, no, that's the whole opposite of what we're meant to be doing. And so I think something that's really important is when we approach anything like this is basically like taking it straight back to your baseline and really thinking what's achievable and what your time zone is, and how can you make sure that in a year's time you'll still be enjoying what you've incorporated into your diet or into your lifestyle. And I think so much about a healthy lifestyle is looking at it holistically. And it's not just like this one thing is going to make you feel 10 times happier or the best version of yourself. It's these small things every day that you do. And I think that's a really big problem that I have around the word diet, because diet feels like really restrictive and like it's just there for a short period of time. Whereas lifestyle basically makes it feel like you could be living this in 10 more years and you're still doing those things that you incorporated. Like, imagine if you're doing that like 10 years on, like where would you be? And like that should be your aim. It's like a healthy lifespan as opposed to kind of a 6-month spurt. Because we know that's better for our lifespan generally. So I think that's kind of one of the biggest misconceptions, is that there's, it's more of a long-term game than a short-term strategy. And it's all these different fundamentals that come into play.
Beautifully said. Absolutely. I mean, one says die in it. Another says life. Like, just put them on the table. Which do you choose? I mean, it's like, but that's really beautiful.
Funny how that worked out.
I know. It's like, I don't know that we need to do any more explaining beyond die and life.
Simple.
But no, that was really beautifully said. And I think that it's a really perfect segue into the next question, which this is kind of like a magical power one. You have a magical power. We've talked so much about we've talked to so many habit experts and how difficult it actually is to implement a new habit. You have a magical ability to implement a new habit into every person on earth that is going to make them a happier, healthier person. What's the one habit that you just like go, all right, everybody's getting this. They're waking up tomorrow with it and they're going to do it for the rest of their life?
Oh gosh. Okay. I don't know whether it's a habit or whether it's something that activates within oneself. Maybe I'm taking this too far. Well, I
love both. I love both.
If I could get everyone to wake up tomorrow and laugh, that for me would be like the best route to health, because it basically just like gives you actually an immense joy. It releases oxytocin, which we know increases our lifespan. It's why having a dog increases your lifespan by 7 years. Like, we know when we release the oxytocin, like we feel good. Right? It's like what we have when we're in love, and like all of those moments, like when we hold a baby and we get that amazing release of oxytocin. And like, I think sometimes we just forget to laugh, like laugh at ourselves, laugh at one another. And I think actually that relaxes you a lot more. Like when we have sex, we get oxytocin, right? And so it's like, if we actually just woke up and laughed every day, like we would just set ourselves into a really positive mindset. And that is the easiest choice to then make your decisions. Whereas if you're waking up in a very kind of like negative, shrouded mindset, everything feels like a struggle. Everything you do through the day feels hard. Everything to do to cook a healthy meal is exhausting, or putting on your exercise shorts. Like, why would I want to do that? I feel like crap. But if you're laughing and you're feeling joyous, then actually things just feel a little bit easier. So I kind of feel like that would probably be the thing that I would love to implement, like through everyone. I think we just need more laughter in our lives.
Dude, there's crushing an answer, and then
Then
there's
there's what you did.
Sarah Ann just did. Okay. Wow.
That's so true. You absolutely crushed that one. I was like, oh, that's a great point.
Oh my God. That's it.
That's the one. We need to make like a laughter ritual or something. I don't know.
Oh,
I think you can actually pay
so
for that,
true.
but we need to make that.
It's so true. It's such a beautiful practice, and just like recognition of, if like laughter is a strength, joy is a strength, and sometimes like it is something to work on and continue to build, but sometimes we just kind of like glaze over it, whether it's within ourselves or other people are bringing laughter and joy to our lives, and we don't necessarily like recognize it or feel that like value from it until it's gone. And
Totally.
it's just like one of those things that like I know, like when I'm having a day and like someone makes me laugh. Rachael says I'm an easy laugh, but I just think she's really
That's
funny.
a good quality. But that's I'm saying, because it's a snowball thing with laughter. I feel it's like
That's exactly what I was thinking.
yeah, like it snowballs your whole day into like this vibe, and it's that vibe of like joyous, carefree, like even if you don't have to be all of those things, but like that act of just like laughter, it like makes those things come more to the forefront for you, and you see them more in your day, whereas maybe you might have missed them.
Totally. And if you like, if you're making like Kelsey laugh, that makes you laugh because that makes you happy. It's so much nicer looking across a room at someone that's like laughing and smiling, as opposed to someone who's like really angry and stressed, because then you feel that energy shift. And so if everyone wakes up a lot more joyous and a lot more happier, then actually that creates a real energy flow, and it basically has like a domino effect where the person that you're next to will also feel that. And that's just good all around, I think.
Imagine Sarah's world where she really did have this power and
I
everyone laughed
know.
more. Like, I just want to go there. Just sign me
Right?
up. I'm so here for that. You could have totally wasted that answer, and like it wouldn't have been the world that I'm now dreaming of.
We
We can all manifest that.
It's
Love
so
it.
true.
All right, let's start right here. Us three. Okay. All right, this is a good start. As a health expert, you developed 7 pillars of health. And I want to talk about how you kind of came to these, how you developed them, and just what do they mean in your practice?
Yeah. So it's really interesting, right? Because, gosh, I feel like I think about this a lot on how I explain this in a very succinct answer so it doesn't get too complicated, because they are 7 pillars. But I really believe, like, I started in nutrition, and that's kind of like where 10 years ago I rooted for myself, because for me it was actually like I need to get better and I need to physically understand how I do that. And then that just basically opened up like a rabbit hole, and I was like, oh my god, this is like the very start of health. There are so many other things and they all intertwine. And I remember for ages people going, just put your messaging into nutrition, just talk about nutrition, like you really know your stuff about this. And I was like, no. I was like, because that's not true. I was like, yes, it is one small facet, but there are so many other things. Like if we have a really bad night's sleep and we wake up exhausted, okay, we have like physical hormones in our body that tell us that we're hungry. So we have this hormone, this hunger hormone called God, I'm gonna call it ghrelin, but I call it a gremlin. That's how I remembered it, because it's like a little gremlin that comes up and it's like, I'm really hungry, feed me carbohydrates. And all of a sudden your body is like firing you to have loads of glucose. So when people wake up and they're like, well, how do you fast? Or how do you have a high protein breakfast? How do you not want that like buttery toast that's delicious with jam? And it's because people's hormones are settled. Whereas somebody who hasn't slept very well, they have this gremlin or ghrelin, which is their hunger hormone that shoots up. So they're basically already 2 steps back for somebody that's had a good night's sleep. And so then you go through your day trying to battle all of these hunger hormones that are telling you what to eat, but in your mind you're saying, well, I should be having fruit and I should be having high protein and I should be having this. So I think like I started to realize all the facets, and I started understanding more about like, how do emotions play a massive part in what we eat? Well, it plays a huge part in what we eat. If we have a low self-esteem and low self-worth, and we've grown up as food as a reward, like we automatically crave those like childhood foods that make us feel good, and that can take us into a really interesting but sometimes a poor dynamic with our eating. And actually that plays a massive fundamental role. So you can't just tell somebody to eat this when actually they've got all of this kind of these emotional backlogs going on, which is actually predetermining what they want to eat because it's going to make them feel good. And so then that was another pillar I looked at, like emotional resilience, and how do we actually foster that, and what does that mean? And then another one was mindful movement. So for me, going back to the New York days, which I spoke about, I was basically woken up. I told, okay, we're going to do Soul Cycle at 6 a.m. in the morning. We might do this Pilates, which is like SLT, which was like this really hardcore, intense workout. And then I'm going to go and have a juice. And then I'm going to, walk to my job. And then I'm going to have a coffee. And like none of it was sustainable. And I was like, I feel exhausted going to these high intensity workouts. Yeah, I feel like I need to do that. And so like mindful movement was a pillar where actually like sometimes we need those intensities, but actually other times we need flexibility. We need to be like mindful with our bodies. We need to actually connect with how we're feeling. So mindful movement really brings in that concept of like connecting to your body and then understanding what movement you need. Because I only looked at movement as like physical high intensity movement. And actually, I really needed to be like battered down by understanding that there's so many types of movement and all of them have good relationships to our health outcomes. We just need to understand what's good for us and when to do it. So let me just talk through. So I spoke about sleep. I spoke about emotional resilience. Nutrition was one. You guys might have to remind me on because I'm going down a rabbit hole now. Hang on, let me just think about what my pillars were because now I've literally started to combine them all together. Stress was another one. So basically for me, I was so overtly stressed all the time that I never ever looked at the concept of how all of these different things, and that's kind of like the epicenter of all of my pillars, is how it finishes off, combine to support one another. When we're highly stressed, we can't make decisions about what we're eating. And actually, it really affects our micronutrient absorption. Like all of these things, like when we're stressed, if we're doing high intensity exercise, it increases our cortisol and our adrenaline. So we shouldn't be doing that. So stress is a pillar which we really, really look at how it dampens our immunity and actually how we can reduce stress and how we can support it. Another pillar is, I'm back on a roll now, is self-care. And that was really at the start of my journey. Like self-care, I think is really, really overlooked. And the reason I say that is because we look at self-care, especially for women, by the way, we really look at self-care as, oh, we're going to go and book a spa day, or I'm going to go and do this for one day with my friends. But actually self-care are like daily moments of self-respect. And that's how I talk about it. Like how many times in a day have you checked in with yourself or done something that's given you joy? Because you shouldn't go through a whole day without checking in with yourself or doing something for you. And it shouldn't be expensive. Okay, it could literally be like just before this podcast, I decided to close my laptop for 20 minutes. I decided to walk outside the door, make myself a cup of tea, and just literally do some deep breaths and just feel that I was present in nature. Otherwise, I will go through this whole day without stepping away from my desk, without making a tea because I was thirsty, without getting some fresh air. It's all of those moments that combined that actually make you feel that you're looking after yourself. Whereas we have this tendency to look after people all the time and we very rarely look after ourselves. And the more that we do that, the more that our body basically breaks down. And that's what I was doing at the beginning of my career. And I've worked really hard over these last 10 years to build that in. And self-care, again, you build it in through nutrition. You build it in through having an early night's sleep. You build it in from saying, okay, I'm going to have 2 nights in this week because that's what I need. And so self-care is a really, really important pillar. But I think the terminology around it that we have in our society makes it just feel very faddy and like, oh, I'm going to have a bubble bath. But it's like not that at all. And I get quite angry when people talk about self-care like that because I'm like, no, that is not self-care. Self-care is self-respect. And to me, that's like the ultimate definition of success. And so like I built these 7 pillars for a way to people to really understand like what is it for them that each of these pillars represent. And something that is really confusing when you look at these pillars, that you have loads of different experts talking about these pillars very specifically. And I find that very difficult because if you're just talking about sleep, but you're not looking at all the other pillars, your sleep is not going to be great. If you're just looking at nutrition, but you're not looking at all of these other pillars, your nutrition is not going to be great. And so, what I really try to do with my health messaging is entwine all of these different pillars together and show you how each one of these pillars basically acts as a domino effect to one another. And the more that we can kind of look at these as a group, the more that we can all elevate our own health and what's important for us and our needs. So if you're a mum and you got a 3-month-old baby, your sleep is not going to be great, right? But if you're a man who is like 36, single, career driven, he's got a completely different health pillar in the pillar of sleep and all the other ones. So I think it's about like breaking what these pillars down mean for you and how you can kind of optimize each one. And they're going to flex. And that's the whole point, right? They're not going to be structured and linear. Like they're going to flex like our journeys. And I think the more that we can talk about that and the importance of that, and when we need to put more emphasis on one than the other, is kind of like the true definition of health. Because like we face stress and change all the time, and so we've got to understand like what can we do for ourselves in these moments in each of these pillars that's going to have a domino effect and support our health kind of day to day. So that's my pillars.
I love the flexibility in that, because when we're looking at how we can implement some of these things in our lives, like we want this just like one, this is going to be the major fix to everything that feels unhealthy in our bodies. But like there isn't a major fix, and they can be flexible throughout our lives, because there are seasons where, you know, we are able to dedicate more time to the gym or to our physical health, and there are seasons where we have more sleep and are feeling, you know, at the top of our games because we've had a really good night's sleep, and there are seasons where, you know, we don't have enough sleep. But the idea of checking in with yourself in a self-respect and showing that self-care is honestly like a mind-blowing concept. We did an entire episode on redefining self-care, because same thing, we were like, this isn't like face mask and like getting your nails done or like bubble baths. Like you really have to define what self-care looks like for you, what it feels like for you, and how you feel afterwards, and carving out some of that time to check in with you and what your needs are right then. Because we really live in a society and in a culture where there's so much emphasis on checking in with other people to see how we feel. I'm going
Oh my
to
gosh,
ask you what I
honestly,
should
it's so
eat.
true.
Like
WhatsApp
how
is
should
so
I?
stressful where it's like online, you're like, oh God, I've not responded to that person. And so you're constantly just like worried about that outlet. Whereas it's very rarely like online with ourselves. Have we checked in with ourselves? It's like that WhatsApp notification that we've just kind of left. That we're like,
Yeah.
basically we're not invincible. Whereas everyone else that we've unread on WhatsApp, we panic and we're trying to go through and respond to everyone. Whereas kind of our own WhatsApp message, we just basically forget about. And I think that's really, really important. Like, what do you do in your day that is for you? And for me, it's like writing down, like on Sundays, I take half an hour out of my whole weekend, which is not that much, but I write down like my week, and I'm like, okay, what is it that's really important that I need to focus on this week for work? What's really important that I need to focus on my personal side? What is it that I need to do that are like chores that I really want to do, but like pay bills or whatever is my electricity? And then how am I going to like get my healthy food this week? When do I have time for a shop? Like all of these things, but that's me taking care of myself. That's not me running a bubble bath and sitting there and being like, oh, this feels really relaxing. This is like me actually like actioning what I need through my week, and like when am I going to put those moments in for myself? And it's so important. But if we think about doing that, we probably go, oh, we haven't got time. And that basically means that you don't think that you're worthy. That's basically the message you're saying to yourself. Okay, I'm not worthy of that half an hour. Like that's better on the kids, or that's better on me doing the dishes, or that's better on me calling a friend, or whatever it is. But actually that half an hour is like really important for you to kind of have some mental headspace about your week going forward. And that shows that you've got self-worth, as opposed to saying, oh, I'll just push it to the bottom of the pack, which defines self-care.
Yes, redefine it and call it what it is. And I would like to say, just as a, from the stance of a content creator, thank you for not taking the easier road, which is just to hammer one message and say it's all about this. And if you just buy this thing, that I'm selling. What a
I know, right?
coincidence.
What a coincidence.
I just can't believe it. It's just your lucky day. But like that is such an easier road because it is so much more difficult to say,
Mm.
ooh, actually it's like 7 things. And it's gonna kind of take me like a minute to explain them out. People are like, you know, I
Mm.
gotta go.
Yeah.
Something
It's
else
not a
just
pill.
popped on my screen. Yeah. Is it a pill
Right?
or is it not a pill?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
coming on Amazon or is it not?
Can I buy it on Prime?
This is a much more difficult road as a content creator to actually tell the truth and all of the facets of the truth and say, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than you're
Mm.
making it. And I know that you really want me to type this like really simple answer right now, but
Mhm.
it's going to take 4 paragraphs. And I'm
Yeah.
going to need you to stick with me because it's the truth.
Yeah, that's the
But it's
hardest
hard.
thing. It
Mhm.
is. It really is. It's like, and it's that really fine line, like, with a lot of stuff that I do content wise now. And I write my weekly newsletter, and people are just like, make them super short. And I'm like, no, like, so much about my newsletter is like informative information for people. You've got your recipe in there, which is short. You've got your podcast in there, which is short. But then you've got kind of like 2 big things around brain bites and my musings on things that have kind of like caught my eye and things that I find really important to discuss. And I'm like, health is simple at the end of the day, but it's also really confusing. And I think the big problem around like people that are just advocating one strong message or are sitting there saying, well, this is what I do in my day, and I take this supplement and I get up at this time and I do this and I have the most perfect life. It's just not life. And I'm like, actually, the more that we can have this like wider conversation, if you can like take those nuggets and go, oh my God, I find that really helpful, or I find that really interesting, then you can implement them in like what you feel is right for you. But it's so hard to make content like that, honestly. Like the amount of times people are like, no, just make it into a quick like hook. And I'm like, no, like that's not my messaging. It's really stressful. And it does take more time, but I really hope that like my audience who are with me, it's trusted and they know they're not going to get faddy trends or remarks, and they know that real time goes into that content. And I think that's something that's really important, that I can tell when content's made from people that know what they're talking about and they're not trying to sell something. And I think that's actually really important, like the time that goes beyond it. So hopefully with my audience that grows with me will hopefully respect that
Yeah.
and actually have healthier lives.
Yeah,
And more money in their
have the
pockets.
results, have the results that they're actually looking for. But I guess that's why it's so important that the conversation has really diversified, after COVID when it comes to like mental health, physical health, and where there's more people. When we first started the podcast, we didn't have guests on, I think, for the first year and a half, maybe. And the reason was because the messaging out there, we couldn't find people that were really within our messages, that weren't just trying to sell a fad diet, that weren't just trying to tell everyone to cut calories and everyone to do this specific mode of exercise, and that we just really had trouble finding this type of messaging and having this type of conversation at the beginning. Because we launched our podcast and the first episode was called Fuck the Scale. So we were like,
Love
so we're
that.
going to enter in health and fitness, and we're going to tell you that the modality you've been using to gauge that is absolute bullshit, and we hope you like us. We were like,
Couldn't get any guests though.
we couldn't get any guests, but we were just like, well, this is the truth. This is what we believe, and this
But
is
you're
what we're
like being
gonna.
true to yourselves. I'm like, oh my God, how amazing. Like, so, and it is so scary also for somebody
Yeah,
who puts themselves out a lot online, very vulnerable, speaks very vulnerably on my show. It's scary because for so long I didn't do that because, I was in the limelight as a model and I was in the press as a model. So already I was in the limelight. I was like terrified to actually bring out, because I was being a character before. I was like, I can just, I'm just this like character. Like no one really knows me. But now people really know me. And it's really scary because you're going to be judged. And actually, you just have to go, do you know what? My whole messaging is around helping people. And I feel very lucky that the audience that I've kind of managed to carve is like a beautiful, friendly, supportive community. And I think that's going to be the same as yours because you've actually come out and you've just been true. And I think people can tell when you're lying and people can tell when you're trying to sell something. And actually, you coming out and making that statement it's terrifying because you're like, I might be hit with backlash here, but you're also being super true and authentic to yourself. So even if you are hit with backlash, it's like, well, it doesn't matter because that's what I truly believe. And I'm actually being true to myself and true to my guests and true to my show. Whereas if you came out and you were like, okay, let's talk about calories, for you guys, you would have been like, well, actually, this isn't what I believe. And then I get a backlash, and that's when you start to feel a bit more anxious because you're like, okay, maybe I'm getting backlash because actually what I'm saying is not true, or I'm not being true to myself. And I think it's just such a good message to say, actually, you took the plunge, you took the leap, which is like hugely kind of admirable to say, but it worked. Like, people obviously now know that you speak the truth. And I think that's such a lovely thing, to feel the confidence to do that and actually take the plunge. So it's like huge credibility to you for doing it.
Girl,
Thank you.
same.
Yeah, same.
Girl, same. I do want to talk a little bit about your podcast because you have interviewed a lot of really, really amazing people. People that are just absolutely putting out messages that have not been heard before. And you're amplifying voices that are, it's so helpful for people to have access to this. So I was just wondering if you could give like one really memorable moment, from your podcast or someone you interviewed or something that you learned on your podcast that was really memorable that you could maybe share also with our listeners.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is going to be so hard. I'm going to have to go probably to one of my recent ones because do you know what? Like, when I started my show, and it's probably similar to you, like, you never think that you'll end up interviewing people that are your heroes. And I ended up interviewing people that were like my heroes. And I was like, how is this happening to me? And I definitely think that, like, part of my self-confidence was that for years, especially for years, I was actually I had confidence on how I looked, right? Because I made a massive career out of that and became really successful in what I did. What I never became successful in was my intelligence when I was 20, 21, 22, 23, or basically all through my schooling years. And I never knew like what entrepreneurship was, or I never knew like anything. Like, this was just so far. Even now it feels weird saying things like that, but it was just so far out of my grasp because it was out of sight, which for me feels out of reach. And being able to interview some people that I really looked up to, I just thought I would never be able to have that conversation. Like, for me, that feels so far away. And then as I kind of build up respect on the scientific side, I was like, no, maybe I'm going to start having these conversations. And there were so many moments in my podcast where there were moments that people had never shared before, and there's like two that comes to mind. So one is one of my very first podcasts, and it was, I think it was my second one. So this is like nearly 4 years ago. And it was I don't know if she's that well known in America, but she's called Victoria Pendleton, and she was our big British cyclist. And she came into the show and she left British cycling. And and from what I thought, she just thought she got to an age and she retired. But actually she was told that she couldn't compete because she got to a certain age, even though she was like, her stats were all right and she was making all these PBs. They were like, I think we're just a little bit old, and she was like in her 30s or something. So she had to step down from Team GB. And this basically sent her into like a really heavy depression, where she tried to kill herself. And it was actually her coach who found her. She's taking a huge overdose of paracetamol. And she started talking to me about the story, and I was discussing with her, like, what was that journey like, and like, how did you feel, and how did you have this realization that, like, you were in that dark space. And then all of a sudden she also said, and then I had extreme bulimia and anorexia. And it was like one of those things that, because she was such a big personality, I didn't expect for her to literally divulge her life to me. And I also didn't have any expectation of that. I just thought we were going to have kind of a conversation around mental health and the stress of, being a pro cyclist in Team GB. And it ended up going into like a 2-hour conversation. And I think, like, I was in tears, she was in tears, and she was just like, I've never spoke about this apart from my family. Like, no one knows about this happened in my life. And I felt like this real honor and privilege to like hold that space for somebody that felt, comfortable to say that to me. And these things happen in my consultations sometimes, like when we have to really get down to kind of the nitty gritty parts of like people's lives and why they are where they are and what's kind of driven them there. And we kind of really divulge into that. But doing that online is a completely different thing. And And so that was something that really kind of came out to me. And then I was like, well, okay, I think so much about my podcast is not just going to be about science. It's going to be about people's stories, because actually, like, these are things that hate people the most. And through all of my learning, you know, I always made kind of health decisions based on conversation or based on a story that had really ignited a response to me. So I really wanted Live Well Be Well to be an amalgamation of like the correct health advice, which people find really inspirational and not linear, but also I really wanted it to be like profound stories where people were like, oh my God, I feel seen, like I feel heard. That's what happened to me. And that was the moment when I was diagnosed with dyslexia, or told I had dyslexia, and someone said to me in my brain, this is how your brain works. This is why you think like you do. This is how you don't fit into the system, but this is why it's going to be great. And all of a sudden, I just remember like bursting into tears. And it was the first time that like somebody had explained my brain. And I wouldn't got that from a book, you know. I wouldn't have had that profound effect if someone was like, well, this is what neurodiversity means. This is what dyslexia is. You can't read and you can't write very well, but blah, blah, blah. You can't do your pronouns. And I was just, you know, I wouldn't have had an effect, but somebody actually like explaining it to me in a story just gave me this massive release of emotion. I felt seen for the first time in my life. And so literally about 3 weeks ago, it was an episode that came out last week, and I feel like he's a lot more known in the States, I think, but it's Shane Parrish. And he inspired me to start my podcast about when I started about 3 or 4 years ago. And he basically was a spy, a Canadian spy, started this really like famous blog that was anonymous. All of Wall Street started reading it. One of his bosses, I don't know what the spy place is called. We'd call it MI5 here, but you know, over in Canada, I bought in his blog and was like, "You should read this blog, Shane. It's a really good blog." But because it was anonymous, he didn't know it was him. And Shane was like, "Oh my gosh, this is my blog. Like, it's actually getting some really big traction." And so then basically decided to like name it Farnham Street, and created this whole concept around how do you make good decisions? How do leaders become good leaders? How can we increase our focus? And it's all around like mental models. And so I found him really fascinating. And then he launched a podcast in line with his blog, which again was like storytelling, politics, business, all these like inspirational speakers. And I would listen to that show and find like certain parts of that around the health and sciences and storytelling like really inspirational. And it kind of drove me on my messaging and how I wanted the show to come across. And I got him on my show last week. And so I was sat there being like, okay, he's developed like 200 mental models. He's probably the most intellectual man out there. He's like a human encyclopedia. And I was so nervous to interview him because I was like, he's going to come on and I'm going to pronounce something wrong. I'm going to say something backwards. I'm not going to pronounce it. And I was like terrified. And also every podcast I'd listened to him with, it was like very much like bro on bro. You know, like very much like, yeah, man, I feel that too. And like, what do you think about the concept of X? And I was just like, oh, I just don't relate to this. Like my podcast would be so different. And he came on, and my God, I couldn't find anything about this man online. He was like, I've got one thing written about me on the New York Times. And that was it. And it was very top line. And I was like, I've really got to like get into him, you know, because he's so fascinating. And my gosh, that conversation went to somewhere I never expected it to be. Like, he broke down in tears and he was like, you know, told me that he nearly died 2 years ago, and all of these concepts that he's been rethinking about, and, you know, his child that also got neurodiversity, and how he's struggling with him, and, you know, how he, not struggling with him, but how basically he's struggling with the schooling system, how he's not fitting into it. And I was like, well, you know, you've done all of these books on mental models. You know, I'm writing my book and I feel super kind of inferior to like watching you. And then he just went right at the end, well, I'm dyslexic. And I was like, what? I was like, hang on. You're telling me that you're dyslexic. I'd obviously looked at him as like this man who was like so intellectually intelligent that would never be neurodiverse. And it was just those moments when they come. And, you know, for him, it was such a raw interview. Like he was like, he burst into tears on it. So, you know, it really hit him hard. And
You know what? The bros aren't bringing that.
Right?
The bros aren't bringing, okay, bro, okay. You know what? You brought something
like,
really special.
And it's like these moments when you're like, oh my God, we're all the same. Like, we're all the same. And we like, and again, like this is where the role model comes into play. Like, we look at these people, but when you can really get to like the human centric part of people, and that's the part that I find most interesting, it's like we really believe that actually we're really not that dissimilar. And if we can create those conversations more, and we can create more inspiring conversations, we can get people to actually connect to these people that we look up to, where people go, oh my God, I could be like that. That to me, I find super inspiring. And so I think that was something that I left that conversation, and like the amount of euphoria that I had in me, I was just like, for me personally, I was like, wow, this makes me feel like I can achieve anything now. Like, now I've heard this, like, for me personally, it felt like a therapy lesson, and I opened up an immense amount in that show. But I think that's what I really try to drive from the conversations on the show. It's not just like this health related advice, it's like real deep human connection, and like getting to that person and opening that up so whoever is listening can feel super inspired and that they're not held back. And so I think that's one that really stands out in the periphery of my mind, because for me it just hit me so much. So yeah, have a listen and let me know what you think.
Well,
Well,
I definitely am.
I think you've done that here. I think that
Yeah.
I so many of our listeners are going to leave this conversation feeling
Oh, I hope
incredibly
so.
inspired and incredibly uplifted by who you are and what you've brought to this space. It's just incredible, and you're so honest and you're so true to yourself, and it's just really refreshing. And seeing a woman being able to hold this space and be confident enough to just go after entrepreneurship and being, neurodivergent, and just saying like, fuck all that, I'm doing it
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm here for this. I'm here
Oh,
for it.
thanks, guys. I'm here for you guys too, helping share this important message.
I mean, I think it's so important because what you've brought out in a lot of your guests is just the ability to share actually who they are. And I think that's why sometimes when people are sharing, parts of themselves, whether it be being neurodivergent is something that a lot of people who have made it to this point have been a part of themselves that they have stifled, tried to hide, and tried to work around. And it's been this kind of taboo topic where like we don't share those things. And when you can honestly talk about it and share something like that of yourself and what some of the struggles are, it opens up this line of communication where like we could just honestly talk about ourselves and our struggles and who we are really. And it doesn't have to be this, mask that you're constantly wearing because you have to stick to a message because you said it once. Or like you thought this at one point and you have to stick to that. It's like you really have opened up those conversations with so many of your guests to really share who they are. So I want our listeners to be able to hear more from you. And where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram, that's where I'm most active, which is at Sarah Ann Macklin. My website, which has my weekly dose of mental nourishment newsletter, which I really try to entwine with what I just said, like a bit of me and a bit of like personal storytelling with health advice, to basically get your week going. So that's your weekly dose of mental nourishment, which is on my website. And then there's loads of courses on there that you can do. There's loads of free downloads, like free recipes for your to beat stress and all things like that. So go and check out all of those kind of like free tools that you can get as well. And then Live Well Be Well podcast. That's the one that's released every week, with a host of kind of different guests, which is on YouTube and like any podcast streaming platform like Apple and Spotify.
Thank you, Sarah Ann. This has been such a pleasure, and we are so lucky to be able to give our listeners this gift of you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a nice conversation. I've really, really loved meeting you both. It's a shame it's not in person. Maybe one day we'll try and figure that out. But
they're all just here for your voice. I mean, it's next level. How much can I shut up during this so that she can just have that lovely voice? You're welcome, you guys.
Thanks, guys.